So today I'm here to demystify some horticultural terms. When I first started gardening, I knew nothing. I didn't know the name of any plants. I just thought there were an infinite number of plants that I didn't know about, and there seemed to be an infinite number of terms that people used, and I had no idea what they were talking about. So today I'm going to explain it all very simply, and you too can pretend to know what you're talking about when it comes to plants. So the first term I want to talk about relates to the life cycle, or the length of time that a plant lives. The two key words to remember are annual and perennial. I've got an example of an annual plant here. So this is a calendula, or pot marigold, and this is an annual plant. So this plant, it grows from a seed into a plant, produces flowers, the flowers produce seeds, and then it dies, and it does that all within one season, 1 year, hence the name annual. And then you have other plants, for example, this rosemary, which are a perennial, and that just means it lives for a long time. And you might get a short-lived perennial, a little shrub that dies after 3 or 4 years, or you might get a really long-lived perennial like a tree, like this sumac tree behind me. So those are your first two key terms, annual and perennial. So the second set of terms that are really useful when categorizing plants are woody and herbaceous. And I've got plenty of examples here. So woody plants, as the name suggests, have a woody structure. So this rosemary has woody stems, and even if this lost its leaves in the winter, which it doesn't, that woody structure would remain above the ground throughout all time. You know, that woody structure stays there and it gets bigger each year. So all trees are woody. I know this sounds ridiculous, but it's true. And then if a plant is not woody, then it must be herbaceous, and that means it doesn't have a woody structure. So I've got this nasturtium, herbaceous. I've got this lemon balm, herbaceous. I've got these chives here, and they are also herbaceous. So that's your second set of terms. Either a plant is woody or it is herbaceous. So our final terms are tender and hardy. And so for that, we're off to the polytunnel. So I am up in the polytunnel. I am surrounded by lots and lots of tender plants. In fact, the only non-tender or hardy plant in the polytunnel is this calendula that I'm holding. Now, I feel like tender and hardy are the most confusing of the terms. You hear about things being quite hardy, half hardy, not hardy, tender, but at its basic level, it is very simple. A hardy plant is one that can withstand temperatures below 0 degrees C. It can withstand frosty conditions, whereas a tender plant is one that cannot. And I've got a couple of examples here. We have this sweet geranium. This is a tender plant, hence it being in the polytunnel in a pot. We've got lemon verbena, a lovely tender perennial. And then we also have this squash, again, another tender plant. The reason you might want to know this is because you don't want to accidentally kill your plants with a frost. So it's a good thing to know. It will help you decide where to plant your plants, whether they can be outside over the whole season, and whether you need to have them in pots so you can bring them inside. And in terms of sowing seeds, it lets you know when you ought to sow them. So calendula, a hardy plant, we would sow seeds for this in the autumn or very early in the spring. Whereas a tender plant that we're growing from seed, like this squash, you would wait a bit later. You wouldn't be sowing it in February or March like you would this. You might be sowing it in April or May. You wait so that when you are ready to plant it out, that last frost of the start of the year has already gone, and it's safe to plant it out. So there you go. Hardy and tender, two words to know that are very useful when deciding what and where to put your plants. We have talked about our 6 key horticultural terms. We had annual and perennial, we had woody and herbaceous, and we had tender and hardy. So we've covered all of those. And now, if you will come with me into the confusing world of combining those, then please stick with this. It is not as confusing as it sounds, I promise. So first of all, our first combination is a hardy annual. So I'm back to my welly of calendula again. This is a hardy annual, so it is frost tolerant, and it is an annual. It completes its life cycle with 1 year. That's what hardy annuals are. So don't be alarmed by that term. The next combination term is a herbaceous perennial. And I've got this lady's mantle here as an example of that. It is herbaceous, so it doesn't have a woody structure, and it's a perennial. It lives for many years. People talk about herbaceous perennials often in the context of herbaceous perennial borders. But again, don't be alarmed. It is what it is. They're just herbaceous perennial plants in a border. They often die back during the winter, so you'd expect empty looking beds over the winter months, and then in the spring they all shoot up with lots of lovely foliage and flowers. So that's herbaceous perennials. The final term, I have to admit, I do find it can be a little bit confusing. So the term is half-hardy annual. So half-hardy, it kind of sounds like maybe it's quite hardy. In reality, a half-hardy annual is not hardy at all. It is a tender plant. And secondly, the annual bit, you should know what that means by now. It completes its life cycle in 1 year. But actually, when it's combined as a half-hardy annual, these plants are often perennial. So they are native to hotter climes than Northern Ireland. And if they were growing in their native habitat, they would live for many years. So they would be perennials. But we grow them as annuals in this country, hence the name. So half-hardy annuals are the zinnias of this world. They're the bedding plants that are grown in great numbers in the spring. They're grown from seed using heat mats because they need lots of heat to germinate. And then they are brought up by councils and planted on roundabouts in great colourful displays. So don't be alarmed. Half-hardy annuals, it's a term that people use. They're not half-hardy, they're not annuals, but you know what they are now. So yes, confusion allayed. Go forth and enjoy your horticultural chats with less confusion going forward.